Nick Tracy went to the party with his wife Annie. He didn't want to go, and he didn't want her to go, but she insisted. The party was at the home of famous football player Mike White, who's 34 and retired after leading his team to last year's Super Bowl. He is tall, blonde, and wealthy. He made his fortune by investing money from sponsors through Annie's company and, more recently, directly with Annie. 30 works as a financial expert at Bragg Incorporated, which works with athletes and celebrities. She's a gorgeous blonde. Nick, almost 6 feet tall with a medium build, considers himself lucky to have married Annie 8 years ago in college. Their son, Travis, who is 7 and looks just like Nick, wasn't always tall as a child. His father, Greg, an Army sergeant, served on the same base throughout Nick's life. An only child, Nick faced challenges with bigger kids in the neighborhood, but his mother, Nora, a second-generation Vietnamese, couldn't protect him when she stayed home after losing a race at age 7. Nick's father sent him to a family friend, Jojo Nolan, who taught Nick to fight at Jojo's dojo. Nick excelled at learning to control his emotions, which is crucial for effective fighting. Despite being small, Nick went to the dojo 4 days a week, treating it like church and wrestling like religion. Nick's parents were initially unsure about him attending the dojo, but Nick proved his intelligence by consistently getting A's in school and explaining to them the importance of controlling emotions. In martial arts. At 9, Nick kicked a bigger kid at school, but managed to control his anger, earn respect, and no longer become a target. At 16, Nick grew taller, and at 17, he gained strength and became a little less agile, but Jojo helped him get through it. At 18, right out of high school, Nick was impressive with his good grades. He went to the local university for free. He studied math and computers, but his main focus was business. During his junior and senior years, he met Annie in his business class. They hit it off because of their intelligence and common interests. They soon became romantically involved and found that they were a perfect match in bed. Both Nick and Annie loved adventure and excitement, but they mostly kept their escapades to themselves. Sometimes Nick wished Annie could be like Jamie Lee Curtis, his favorite actress from the movie Blue Steel, and sometimes Annie would indulge his fantasies, but they both knew it was just for fun. When they decided to get married, they didn't have a prenuptial agreement, but they made a serious commitment to each other. After graduating from high school, Annie quickly started making good money, almost as smart as Nick. Well, almost. Her job at Bragg was briefly interrupted by the birth of her son, Travis. Meanwhile, Nick worked from home as a computer programmer for a local company. When Travis was born, Nick became the primary caregiver while keeping an eye on Annie's work. He took some extra money from a successful programming project and invested it in a startup he found through Annie's connections, a dating service that turned out to be profitable. Nick made a tidy sum when it went public and decided to retire, fearing that others would copy the idea. He shared his concerns with Annie, who advised her clients to get out as well. This decision led to the demise of the matchmaking venture. Meanwhile, Nick made some shrewd financial moves, including possibly illegal short selling without Annie's knowledge. 5 years into their marriage, Nick began to notice changes in Annie's behavior, so he kept quiet about his growing business success. He even started his own company doing programming work for government agencies. His new job required a security clearance, which he obtained and used to learn more about Annie, uncovering some surprising information. Annie had risen to the top of her company and was making more money than Nick expected. So when Nick dug into her finances, he discovered that she had an investment account with her company. It wasn't illegal, it was all public knowledge, but Annie hadn't mentioned it. They both contributed to a joint account, but filed taxes separately. Despite being a financial expert, Annie didn't pay much attention to her computer, using it only for investments, so Nick had a pretty good idea of what was going on in her life. He didn't pry too much, especially about work matters. However, after finding the investment account, he thoroughly searched her laptop and a new cell phone she had received for work. Nick noticed Annie's focus on her work with celebrities, which didn't raise any red flags because he was interested in that too. They often attended parties hosted by various celebrities and wealthy individuals, about 5 or 6 times a year, and Nick usually enjoyed these parties, although Annie tended to forget about him once they arrived. But she always left with him, and never stayed away long enough to arouse suspicion. Their sex life was still great, almost as good as before. Sometimes, maybe once a month, Nick felt that Annie's mind was elsewhere. So he started checking in on her more often, but eventually came to the conclusion that she was just busy with work. Everything continued as usual until she became Mike White's client. White was married to the actress Jill Slayton. She was attractive, and they had 2 daughters aged 6 and 8. Annie's predecessor was Jake Blake. He was reckless and caused problems by poaching White's clients and trying to seduce Jill Slayton. He didn't quite succeed, but Jill was influenced enough that Mike noticed, so Jake left and Annie got his job. Part of the reason she got it was because she was a woman and Mike asked for it. Annie didn't know that Mike specifically asked for her. When Annie got White as a client, she started spending more time at work and went to lunch with Mike, and Jill knew Mike wanted Annie to handle his investments, so she joined them for lunch to see what was going on. Surprisingly, she wasn't completely opposed to Mike having a relationship with Annie. She herself wanted to be intimate with her co-star in an upcoming movie. She thought that if Mike slept with Annie, he couldn't complain about her and Dirk Madden unless it became public. During lunch, she noticed Mike's keen interest in Annie. He tried to be professional, but she knew him well. Annie was unaware. Jill even wondered if Annie would give in to Mike. She observed that Annie was aware that she was married with a child, but her husband stayed at home and seemed average, so she thought Mike might succeed. She didn't care about Annie's marriage or her family. If Annie screwed up, it was her own fault. Jill and Mike had been married for almost 10 years. In the early years, Mike had strayed a bit on the road. It didn't bother her much. She did the same, but in the last 6 years, after they both confessed their infidelities, they promised to save their marriage, and they did. But now Mike wanted his financial advisor. She was attractive, but Jill still found herself with attractive men who came onto her, including Dirk recently. She felt tempted. She decided that a brief affair wouldn't ruin their marriage. They both love their children and each other. They'll forgive each other. Maybe they'll even find another way to work things out. Mike was one of the best lovers Jill ever had. It would be hard to give him up, but she thought a change of pace might spice up her bedroom life. After dinner, Jill joked with Mike as they drove home. "Were you in love with that woman? I noticed everything, no matter how hard you tried to hide it from me. I'm sorry, but we made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. What if I let you off the hook? Will you do the same for me? Why would you do that? Because of that guy Dirk? I don't believe the rumors about his manhood, but maybe you're just gossiping. You don't have first-hand experience, but we've been working together for 2 months and he's trying to flirt with me to show off, and you're curious to see if it works. Maybe if he fails, it'll just be a one-time thing." "Jill, I can't agree. We have a family, and we're going to stick together. I'll always love you the most. Another woman won't change that. She never has. Besides, I see what you're planning for this woman, and she's married to Mike with a child. Not to mention my husband." Mike looked at her. "You're suggesting something like a tit-for-tat exchange, more like breasts for a man's thing. But yes, you're going to have to do everything you can to keep this a secret. I don't want our names in the papers or online. That will be my main condition for him. If he breaks it, I'll let you break it. I'll say you're a jealous husband with a lot of friends with guns. Is that clear? Maybe let me think about it. You know what's possible. She won't succumb to your advances. Wouldn't that be great? No substitutes. The deal is just for her. You think I can't win her over? Nonsense, prove it. I don't believe in just words." She smiled, and once again, I realized that men are so simple, Ward, and that's how Annie became Mike White's target. After lunch, Annie went back to her office. She wasn't as oblivious as the famous couple thought. She just knew how to keep a straight face in public. She noticed Mike's excitement during lunch, even though Jill didn't seem to notice it yet. Jill sensed it too. Annie wondered who was making him so excited and concluded that it had to be her, not his wife of 10 years. No matter how attractive she was, Annie had to decide what to do about Mike. Keeping his account was a significant step for her, but she didn't really need it. What did she need? If she were honest, she knew she could take Mike up on his offer. He was tall, confident, and attractive. Her husband, Nick, was strong but lacked charm. Another factor was Mike's well-endowed stature, which she noticed during lunch. It intrigued her. Mike, married to a glamorous movie star, was interested in Annie, but she didn't need the ego boost. She had a family and a wonderful husband, Nick, and she didn't want to risk losing them. She knew that any secret relationship with Mike would eventually hurt Nick and their children too much, so she decided to stay away from Mike. But Mike didn't give up. As his wife Jill's movie shoot approached, he began to pursue Annie more aggressively. At first, he was subtle, but then he became more persistent. Annie was attracted to him, but kept turning him down. After a business meeting, she briefly gave in to a kiss in her office, but quickly stopped, remembering her commitment to Nick. Mike tried to talk her out of it, saying, "Let's do this, Annie. No one will know that we both want it." Annie, almost in tears, stood firm. "I promised Nick, and I won't break that promise. I just can't." Mike left her office frustrated and took out his anger on Jill when he got home, leading to a passionate encounter. The experience was intense for Jill. She thrived on Mike's rough passion, a perfect match for her wild side. Afterwards, they lay exhausted, reeling as if they'd weathered a storm. Jill playfully remarked, "I think your financial advisor is keeping you on edge for my benefit. I'm rooting for her, not you, but if she gives you any more trouble, I might step in." Mike replied, "I'll push her away. She's too loyal to her man." "That's really admirable. Why not just leave her alone? If you win her over, she'll just look foolish because of you. I can't stand by and watch you go after someone else. I bet he's nothing special, but you won't care. I told you, if he lets you down, it'll only be a one-time thing. I might have to take care of Annie myself." "Jill, she really bothers me. Then wait until after the movie. We don't want to ruin the movie. But imagine the box office if he suddenly died right before the release." They laughed. Mike thought about it. He was pretty sure that Annie felt as strongly about him as he did about her. Their kiss had been passionate. She had gasped at the sensation, but he didn't want to push her. As Jill prepared for the shoot, Mike had proposed to Annie. "I respect your commitment to your marriage, but listen, I'm planning a party at Black Rock. It'll be fun with a lot of cool people. Remember you mentioned your husband's crush on Jan Lee Curtis. Well, she's not the one from his favorite movie anymore. Mike showed her a photo of Samantha Jordan, an actress in Jill's new movie, who looks remarkably like her. She's in Jill's movie and might come to the party, and I can get her to flirt with Nick in character. She's 24, fun and willing, according to Jill. Then, while Jill is with Dirk and Samantha is with Nick, you and I can have our time. You mean let him be distracted by her while we're together? Jill will be busy too. It sounds cozy for a weekend, but if Nick finds out I orchestrated this, he won't be happy. He's not the forgiving type when he's upset. Could he really hurt me? Don't worry about me, Mike, no fights. I always have security at these parties. Besides, he's into martial arts, but it's no big deal. Mike smiled, pleased with the plan. This conversation took place over lunch in a dimly lit restaurant booth where Mike kissed Annie passionately, and she returned the kiss by touching him intimately. He considered going further, but decided it was too risky. Eventually, Annie pushed him away, exclaimed in surprise, and called for the waiter, who arrived and said nothing about the scene. Mike paid the bill, and they drove back from lunch. Annie thought about the upcoming Black Rock party on Friday afternoon, anticipating bands, celebrities, and even some athletes. She worried about inviting her husband, Nick, knowing that he wasn't open to other partners and would probably see through the setup. She figured he'd refuse to go if she told him the true nature of the party. That evening, while enjoying a roast chicken dinner prepared by Nick, Annie brought up the party. Nick, Mike and Jill are having a big party this Friday before she leaves for the shoot. It's going to be full of celebrities. We're invited. Nick, aware of Annie's relationship with Mike and suspicious of Mike's intentions, reacts with concern. I've been thinking about Mike White. It seems he's getting too close for comfort. He's clearly pursuing you, and I'm afraid it could lead to trouble. I haven't encouraged him. He's been forward, but I always turn him down. But you haven't been very clear with your rejections, have you? And you haven't mentioned any of this before. Nick, I think we should go to this party together. I haven't changed, but maybe you should consider dropping him as a client, like you did with the last guy. Now it's Mike who's interested. Maybe he should look somewhere else. I'm not going to do that. He's tempting, but I'm not giving in, and I really don't want to go to that party. He'll be there, and he'll try his best to win you over. It could end badly. Nick, he's just a guy and there will be security. I can take care of myself. Annie knew Nick was trained in martial arts, though she wasn't fully aware of his abilities or the potential risks at the party. Nick understood her position, but remained resistant despite the potential dangers. Annie was determined to go her own way, so that Friday after school, Nick drove their son Travis to his grandparents' house in the next county and planned to pick him up Sunday night. The real reason Nick agreed to go to the party was to confront Mike and settle their issues once and for all. He was tired of the ongoing tension and increasingly angry about it. Black Rock, the venue for the party, was Mike and Jill's sprawling country estate, named after a large dark rock in the lake. The estate had a mansion, a pool, a tennis court, and a ballroom. The party was scheduled to start at 7 o'clock, with a buffet, an open bar, and a casual dress code. When Annie came downstairs, she looked stunning in a navy blue dress that was seemingly casual yet strikingly attractive. Nick, though unsettled by her appearance, was dressed in slacks, a silk black and white shirt, pants, and practical yet stylish loafers. Looking at Annie, he joked, "It looks like we should just stay home and have fun." That's what you dressed up for, isn't it? Annie blushed. Do I look all right? You look great as always. Just wondering who you got dressed up for. Nick replied, his tone serious. For you, baby, all for you. Can't we just stay here and have fun? We have to make a good impression on the movie stars and celebrities. You look great too, still unsure. Nick smiled and turned on the stereo, which was playing Phil Collins' Live Tonight, a song he often practiced martial arts to. It had the perfect mix of angry rhythm and drums that he needed as the music played. He danced with Annie briefly before leading her out the door on her way out. Fueled by the song, he jumped and kicked a branch on a tulip poplar tree in their yard. The tune played in his head all the way to the party, preparing him for whatever was to come. When they arrived at the house, there were parking attendants, but Nick decided to park the car himself, tipping them before he found a spot that was easy to get out of. He quickly tipped the valet again to ensure a smooth experience. Annie was puzzled by Nick's behavior, from the song he played at the door, to his unexpected aggression toward a tree branch, and now his insistence on parking the car himself. As they walked to the main entrance, she questioned him about his actions and the song. It's like you're getting ready for a fight. She said yes, and that was all he replied. Annie looked at him and pleaded, Nick, let's just have some fun tonight, relax and have a good time. I need to have a good time, and maybe you do too. Let's just see how it goes. If things turn sour, it could be the end for us. I know you're smart, Nick. Oh no, this could all be ruined before it even begins. But then she thought of Samantha and felt a glimmer of hope as they approached the end. Rance, Mike, and Jill were already there to greet them, Samantha arriving shortly after Jill gave Nick a warm hug, looking radiant and smelling wonderful. Mike hugged Annie and complimented her on her looks, then turned to Nick with a firm handshake. You're Nick. We've heard about you. Nice to meet you. Mike's grip was uncomfortably tight. Relax, Mike. Nick replied with a forced smile. Nice to meet you too. The interaction paused awkwardly, prompting Jill to suggest, why don't we go inside and meet the rest of our guests? Inside, the party was in full swing, and they were introduced to a group that included 4 or 5 football players, some with their wives, actors like Dirk, 2 boxers, and many other attractive guests. The place was bustling. Nick made his way through the party, picking up a salad from the buffet. He struck up a conversation with one of the boxers, who seemed to be pitching something, and opted for seltzer. Nick planned to stay sober that night. While mingling, Nick saw Mike approach Annie and gently take her by the elbow. She responded with a seductive smile, but then said something that surprised Nick. Mike looked over and waved to Jill, who stepped away for a moment and returned with a striking woman. Nick was taken aback as Jill briefly introduced her as Samantha Jordan, her talented co-star. Nick was mesmerized in his opinion. Samantha was the most stunning woman there, outshining both Annie and Jill. Finally, he blurted out, "Hello, you're gorgeous." Samantha, used to attention, was pleasantly surprised by Nick's sincerity and smiled back. She quickly understood her role for the evening. Despite Jill's comment that Nick was ordinary, Samantha found him intriguing and remarkably strong, which surprised Jill. Given Samantha's clear interest in regaining her composure, Samantha took Nick by the elbow and suggested they head to the pool for some privacy. She was open to getting closer, and it seemed that Nick was too. They made small talk by the pool, discussing her acting career and his job, maintaining eye contact throughout the conversation. Samantha's attraction grew, and she openly expressed her interest in spending the night with him. Meanwhile, Annie and Mike hit the dance floor. Annie had seen Nick with Samantha, and after a brief dance, she and Mike drifted toward the bar. Jill and Dirk joined Annie, and she quickly asked about Nick's reaction to Samantha. Jill seemed uncomfortable, which wasn't lost on Annie. Suddenly, an alarm went off. "What's going on?" Annie asked. Jill looked worried and said, "I think they've fallen in love." "That's a big deal." Annie was shocked. "Where are they?" "By the pool?" She hurried over and saw what everyone else was doing. Two people completely enraptured with each other. She turned to Jill and asked, "Is this an act or is it real?" "It's real. Falling in love isn't just lust. It's incredible." Jill admitted that it looked like her plan to distract Mike was working. "He's all yours for today, maybe longer, the way things are going over there," Annie remarked, feeling a mix of emotions. Meanwhile, Samantha decided to be honest with Nick. She explained that she was there to distract him, like a consolation prize. Nick was conflicted. "Sam, I can't do this. I have strong feelings for you. You didn't plan this. Call me if you feel the same way. Maybe we can work something out." He said, "I'll call you Sam. You're the woman of my dreams. I've fallen in love with you," Nick confessed. Sam quickly kissed Nick and left for the parking lot. Nick watched her walk away, lost in thought, and the rhythm of a song playing in his head, determined to find Annie. He wasn't going to let her be intimate today unless it was with him. He found Annie slow dancing with Mike, the last couples on the floor. Their intimacy was subtle compared to Jill and Dirk sharing a kiss. Annie struggled with her feelings for her husband and her attraction to Mike. Mike's physical attraction overwhelmed her. Pushing away her doubts, Annie let Mike pull her close in his hands and move more boldly. He kissed her gently, then with increasing intensity. Caught in the tide of desire, Annie felt adrift. Just then, Nick rounded the corner, moving to the beat of his music. Two security guards approached him, but he wasn't worried. He saw them as all muscle, no threat. Nick tapped Mike on the shoulder. "I'm coming in," he said firmly. Mike snapped back. "Go find Sam. Annie's with me today." I sent Sam away. "She's gone. Annie's free and she's my wife. Get back," Nick retorted. Mike walked away, signaling to his guards as they approached. Nick warned, "Annie, you set me up if you stay. It's over. There's no going back. I won't let you sleep with him. I'll take him out if I have to." Everyone stopped. Struck by Nick's intensity, Mike felt his determination, but couldn't comprehend the depth of Nick's resolve. He motioned for his guards, making Annie tense with fear and extinguishing any remaining desire. Annie protested. "I don't understand why you're against this. You like Samantha. We could have had fun. I can't allow it. We made promises, and I'm keeping mine. You'll keep yours whether you like it or not, at least for tonight. If you want someone else, we can get a divorce. But your plan ends here," Nick declared firmly. Jill stepped in and tried to defuse the situation. Mike let it go. "I'm not going to be with Dirk and make a fuss over nothing," she said. Mike turned to Annie. "You want to go with him?" "If I stay, something bad will happen," Annie replied. "Get this guy out of here." Mike ordered his security men. They grabbed Nick by both arms. Nick looked at Annie, who was frozen, then turned to Mike. He took out the two guards in less than 10 seconds. He stomped on the foot of one and punched the throat of the other. He turned around and punched the first one in the throat. Again. They fell like trees. The rhythm of his song played clearly in his mind, energizing him. Mike panicked, realizing he was in real danger. He swung at Nick and missed. Nick! The women were shocked at how quickly Nick had taken down the guards and Mike before they could react. Nick was ready to hit Mike again, driven by the music in his heart. Nick lifted his leg over Mike, but then Annie screamed, "No, Nikki, no, he's not worth it." Nick stopped, hearing the fear in her scream. He hesitated, leaving Mike on the ground, but still conscious as an athlete. Mike was tough, but he was no match for Nick. In a moment of panic, Mike fled toward the pool, running for his life. He reached the deep end, collided with the diving board, and knocked himself unconscious. He sank under the water, unable to swim. Jill screamed and ran after him when she saw Mike underwater. Nick and Annie also rushed over. Without hesitation, Nick kicked off his boots, dove in, and quickly brought Mike back to the surface. He dragged him to the side of the pool, pushed him onto the concrete, and climbed out. Nick positioned Mike to clear his lungs, pressing down until water gushed out and Mike began to cough. Nick turned to Jill and ordered her to call 90011, and she ran inside. Mike was still coughing but began to breathe more easily. Nick made sure he was out of immediate danger and then walked away. Annie watched him with a mixture of shock and numbness. Nick then checked on the two guards. They were awake and in need of medical attention, but they were stable. Nick sat on the front steps and waited for the emergency services. Police cars and ambulances soon arrived, creating a commotion as they attended to everyone involved. Nick remained seated and watched as the two guards managed to get up, though they were later taken to the hospital. Mike, now stable but still in need of care, was also transported by ambulance. Jill came over to Nick and offered, "I'll get you some dry clothes, come with me." He followed her upstairs to the master bedroom closet. She handed him an oversized t-shirt and sweater and headed for the bathroom to change. Jill stopped him here. "I want to see what she has lost." Nick took off his shirt, having already left his shoes by the pool. He took off his socks and pants, standing in only his wet boxers, which caught Jill's eye. He hesitated for a moment before taking them off as well. Despite his discomfort, she handed him a pair of sweatpants, which he quickly pulled on, then a t-shirt and sweater. "You're incredibly fit, too good to be true." "What's going on with Annie?" Nick asked as he finished getting dressed. "How should I know? Maybe she's looking for something else, maybe someone famous, but I think she's just tired." "Mike's a good-looking guy, isn't he?" Jill replied. "Yes, he is." "You know, Jill, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Maybe you could talk to Samantha too. She seems like she's going places." Nick said, "She definitely caught my eye." "She's special." Nick admitted that Annie might have bitten off more than she could chew, but you have a kid to think about. "I stayed with Mike mainly because of the kids. He's good looking, but on the set I was tempted by Dirk." "Where is he?" "By the way, he disappeared when everything went down. I guess he's not the hero type. I think Mike is going to rethink things with Annie. Maybe you're interested in Samantha." Jill thought maybe. "What goes around comes around," Nick replied with a grin. "But remember, if you ever need anything, I'm here." "I'll keep that in mind." Jill chuckled. "Let's see how things turn out for Annie and Sam." Downstairs, Nick and Jill met Annie coming out of the cafeteria where the police were stationed. Annie eyed them suspiciously. "What are you two up to? You look a little guilty yourself." Jill shot back. "I just gave Nick some fresh clothes and watched him change." You're being ridiculous, Annie." With that, Jill walked away. A police detective then motioned for Nick to sit across from the officers. The female detective, elegant and somewhat attractive, took the lead. "Are you some kind of magician?" "No, but I'm good at what I do. I had to learn early." "Tell me what happened," Nick replied. Nick explained everything as he remembered it clearly, even though 2 hours had passed since the incident. "Did you plan to kill Mr. What?" Detective Bright asked. "It's hard to say that my wife's scream stopped me. I wouldn't have gone through with it. After that, I saved his life. I couldn't just watch him drown. I wasn't thinking about killing anymore, and dealing with the body would complicate things. You know, he hit me first. Well, I defended myself. That was after I took out his guards. That fits your story. Are you going to arrest me? That's up to the prosecutor. This case will draw attention. So we'll see. The new prosecutor is liberal. So it's up in the air. You're free to go for now. All right, just so you know, this house has security cameras. We're reviewing the footage now. We'll get back to you if we need more information. Don't worry about Mike White trying to hit me. He's harmless," he joked brightly, while Stevens remained silent. Nick wasn't laughing back on the main landing. Nick found Annie sitting on the stairs with Jill. He told her, "I'm leaving. You can come with me, or you can stay." Annie stood and turned to Jill and thanked her for a memorable evening. Jill smiled. "I hope our next party will be quieter, and I hope you two work things out." She looked at Annie. "I meant what I said about Heck being remarkable in his own way. You missed something. Sam won't make the same mistake if she has the chance." Annie and Nick got in the car and drove home, arriving around 2:30 a.m. After a quick shower, Annie fell asleep quickly, and Nick wasn't far behind, drifting off within minutes. They both overslept. The next morning, Nick got up around 10 a.m. and went to the kitchen to make breakfast, starving since he'd barely eaten at the party. He was eating cereal when Annie appeared, dressed in a faded pink sleeveless dress that Nick loved. Nick looked up but continued eating, breaking the silence. He said, "I'm not that easy to win over. Even if I were, it would just be physical." He smiled, but hey, that'd be a good start. Just say the word. "I owe you, and I'm willing to pay you back over and over again." Despite his thoughts occasionally wandering to Sand, Nick was clearly taken with Annie. "I'm sorry I tried to manipulate you. It is wrong, and I hope that one day you can forgive me. Until then, I'm here for you," Annie said, and gave him a meaningful look. "In the last few hours, I have had 2 movie stars and my very attractive wife come on to me, and I have resisted them all more than you would have with Mike. That's saying something. You handled him well. I knew you were skilled from our dojo days, but Annie, you're good at a lot of things. Maybe you just don't show it off enough. Do you remember? I told you about my hobby." "Yes, you mentioned it. Can I come to the dojo with you?" Why is she blushing? "Because it's incredibly sexy to see you thinking about taking these guys down. Even Mike. It was almost too much. I'm all yours." Then she stood up and took off her dress, revealing that she was wearing nothing underneath. He looked at her, noticing her eagerness as she stood. He gestured to the floor next to the kitchen table, and she immediately knelt down, taking his hint. It was a bit challenging given his condition, but she was enthusiastic. Impressed by her strength, he picked her up and carried her to the living room sofa, bending her over its back. She anticipated his movements and shifted in anticipation. He joined her to the rough fabric of the sofa, adding to the sensation that she was quickly reaching her climax. Her response was intense as he continued, finally reaching his own climax. Nick felt a renewed attraction between them. Their previous encounters had been lackluster compared to this fiery reconnection at Black Rock. Now her desire was unmistakable and ignited his own. His mind wandered to Samantha and even Jill, each stirring feelings that threatened to complicate his marriage. He pondered the implications of these attractions, realizing the complexity of his desires and the need to make careful choices. Annie whispered playfully, touching him. Looks like we're in for quite an adventure. They spent Saturday lost in each other, exploring different expressions of their passion, until Nick was completely spent by 10 p.m. That night, I win the ZX Marathon, Annie declared, half teasing, half serious. You put up a good fight, but I've got the upper hand. Her words indicated her continued desire. As Nick drifted off to sleep laughing, he was unaware of her deeper desires. Sunday morning was more subdued. Annie was making pancakes, lavishing them with real maple syrup. She took the last one and teasingly rubbed it against herself before offering it to Nick with a playful look, as if my eyes were bigger than my stomach wanted the last pancake. Nick ate it eagerly, savoring every trace of syrup. Annie was amazed at how such a simple act could captivate him afterwards. His face was amusingly disheveled. Annie then pushed him down on the carpet and straddled him, licking the syrup off his face. As they moved together, they climaxed together before collapsing, their faces smeared with syrup, a reminder of their indulgent morning. The syrup was real Vermont maple, rich and slightly unusual, but delicious all the same. The rest of the day passed quietly, exhausted. Nick and Annie decided to relax with a walk in the local park and a simple picnic, leaving the pancakes at home. Annie brought up the disturbing events of Friday. Nick immediately dismissed it with a shake of his head. No, Annie looked surprised. Why not? We love each other, right? You tried to break our vows. I need clarity. You know I have other options. Sam, I should have guessed, damn it. You used what you knew about me to get me to break my vows just so Mike could have his way. It was just physical attraction. He pursued me relentlessly. He's attractive, but think about it. If your plan had worked, we'd be headed for a breakup anyway. Know why? Because it would have meant a total loss of trust and respect. Annie looked down. I didn't think it through. When Mike signaled his guys, I looked at you and thought they were going to throw me out. Oh, Annie, they were intimidating. I understand. And if they had thrown me out, you and Mike would have been together, and that would have been it for us. I might have gone away with you. Nick, lust over loyalty. I highly doubt it's humiliating. I can't go through that again now that I know what you're capable of, and it worries me, Annie. I don't want your loyalty just because you think I'm the strongest. I thought our love meant more, but when you suggested Mike could just get rid of me, you showed where your heart was. She burst into tears and ran upstairs. He stayed where he was, knowing his words had struck a chord, grabbed a couple of beers and settled in to watch a baseball game. Normally, a tough decision or stressful moment would send him into deep thought, wrestling with questions, but not today. Today, he was completely absorbed in the game, letting the simplicity of baseball take over. After the game ended, he pondered the inevitable question, what are my options? The first is to stay with Annie. Second, give Samantha a chance and see where it goes. Third, have a fling with Jill, and then play the field for a while, or so he thought. Maybe all three, but that's unrealistic. Just a fantasy, and recent events had shown him the consequences. When fantasies become reality, life turns sour. Nick rose from his seat and went upstairs to bed. Annie was already asleep, so he kissed her forehead and settled in beside her, falling asleep himself. When they woke up, he kissed her again and said nothing more. They got dressed, and Annie went to work on Monday. Nick called Samantha and explained that he wanted to give his marriage to Annie another try. He asked her to contact him when she returned from the set. She agreed, adding, "Annie's lucky to have you, Nick. If things get too hard, please call." "Oh, I'll definitely call you next." Nick called Jill. "How's Mike doing?" "He's getting out of the hospital today. His private parts are swollen, not surprising. I'd like to talk to him if possible. Could you ask him to contact me when he's ready? I don't want to start an argument." "I'll check. I'll go get him now." Later that day, Nick visited Mike and Jill's apartment in the city. Mike was sitting on the couch. "What's up?" "Sorry for not getting up. I just wanted to let you know that I've decided to give my marriage a try. I'm not thrilled about the effort you're putting into ruining things, but I get it. A famous guy acts like a jerk sometimes." "Yeah, I screwed up. I can be a jerk to Annie and to you, but I'm not always like that." "Then why did I find her incredibly attractive, ZXY and intelligent, so intelligent?" "Sorry, if she's still your advisor, can you let her go for sure, especially since you might just kill me if I don't? It's bad for both of us, especially for me." "All right, I'll keep my word." "I'll back off Jill," who overheard them. "I'll make sure he's happy. I'll go with him to the set and deal with your excessive enthusiasm." Nick grinned at Heck, a lucky guy, and he knows it, dear. "I know, I just forgot for a while. By the way, Nick, thanks for pulling me out of the pool, but why did you do it? I couldn't bear to see you drown, but if you watch the footage, you'll see that I hesitated before I dove in. I'm still trying to figure you out." He gestured to his groin. "It hurts, but at least I'm alive." "Yeah, it's a tough situation. Look, I don't mind if you leave her alone. Actually, I might not stay with her. If I leave, you might have a chance, but ask first, why would you leave her?" "I don't get it." Mike threw in recent events like this stupid plan to mix things up so you could be with her. It's been weighing on my mind. What if I hadn't acted so quickly? Your guards might have thrown me out. And where would Annie have gone? I don't know the answer to that question." Jill added, "I bet she would have gone home with you." "She didn't want to end the marriage. I wanted my stallion to have her here while you got Sam a dream scenario for you, but when Sam left, the plan fell apart." Annie walked toward Mike. "I saw it on the video. You should see it too. I think she might have gone with me, or maybe not. I'm just confused." While he was mainly addressing Mike, Mike jumped in. "When it comes to lust and ZX, women are just as vulnerable as men. I put a lot of effort into getting under Annie's skin, and damn it, she resisted. She wanted me, but she fought me. She never took me to a motel or let me have my way with her at her table. To her credit, I'm no pushover." Nick nodded. "All right. I'll give her credit. Maybe I'm overanalyzing. We were fine for a long time, but man, it got bad." Jill reassured him to give her time. "By the way, Sam was asking about you." "Well, you know what happened, even though she was ready to climax on the phone. It's about Annie's chances. What's wrong with women? Is it like the caveman days? Beat up your husband to get the woman. It's wild, honey. I think it's hard-coded in her genes. Once a woman realizes that you're the decider of fate, she wants you. Same goes for Annie, right? Yes, the same here. She looked at him as if she wanted to take him upstairs. At that moment, Mike growled, but he could hardly move. Nick said, "I better go." "Jill, you were one of the options I had in mind, but I need to talk to Annie." Nick left with visible excitement when Annie returned from work. He promptly escorted her upstairs while Travis watched television. Nick playfully tossed Annie onto the bed and made passionate love to her until she climaxed. Although his focus wasn't solely on satisfying her, she still experienced a powerful climax with heavy breathing. Annie inquired about his day as he rose from the bed. Nick chuckled and she joined in, impressed by her own wit. He told her about his visit with Mike and Jill, emphasizing how Jill had aroused him without touching him. Annie then asked about pizza for dinner, then more intimacy. Nick replied that she agreed, and this time they took their time and thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. After dinner, Travis retired to his room to study, prompting Annie to bring up the subject of their relationship. She expressed regret that she had reacted to Nick's alpha male nature. Nick mentioned that Jill had exhibited similar behavior. "Yes, and now you've surpassed her husband, the former alpha male. How's he doing?" By the way, Annie inquired if he's going to recover. His reproductive organs were swollen, but Jill is taking care of him, and he won't be having relations with that fool Dirk. Annie and Nick shared a dynamic where he could have what he wanted when he wanted it, which he appreciated, but in a strange way, he was tired of it. Annie's extreme submissiveness was beginning to wear on him. 6 weeks later, Jill and Mike returned and invited Annie and Nick to Black Rock for another party. With the cast and crew of the movie, Nick and Annie felt uncomfortable, but finally decided to attend. It was a movie-centric gathering without athletes except for Mike. Annie drove, and they were greeted at the door by the valet and Jill, followed closely by Samantha and a handsome dark-haired man named Vince Cap. Sam. "You know, Annie and Nick guys meet Vince Cap." Also starring in the movie, Jill introduced Vince, quipped, "Unless they cut me out in editing, don't worry, they won't. Women need something to drool over." Sam reassured as they entered. Nick felt a twinge of jealousy towards Vince and Sam. At the buffet, Mike greeted them and shared a warm hug with Annie. They mingled with the film crew, including director Hector Salas and financier Blake Davis, who seemed preoccupied with each other. Nick hesitated to approach them when he observed Hector's interest in Annie. Despite Hector's advances, Annie quickly rebuffed him, knowing she could handle him with confidence. The party continued for a while. Nick sipped beer and ate kebabs while Annie chatted with Vince near the pool, attracting attention from all sides. Samantha and Jill approached Nick as he watched Annie. "Are you worried?" Sam inquired. "No, I think we've reached a new understanding. How are things with you and Vince?" "Hugh is quite the looker, and she was flying solo," Sam replied. Nick looked at Sam, who nodded. "That's about it. He's a player. Looks like he's trying his luck with Annie right now. Well, she's her own person. If she falters, we're in trouble, but I have faith," Nick remarked. "I can't say I'm thrilled to hear that Sam added me." Neither did Jill. Nick laughed at two incredibly attractive movie stars. "Damn it." They split up. Nick walked over to Annie, who was still chatting with Vince. Nick noticed that Vince was slightly intruding on her personal space. He took her hand and asked Vince what it was like to work on a movie. Vince replied, "I was just telling Annie it's hard work, not glamorous at all." "Well, except for Sam." Vince grinned. We have to admit that Nick then led Annie away to where Mike was standing alone. He didn't really fit in with the movie crowd, except for the two stuntmen. What was it like on the set? They went right. Annie asked. Yeah, it lasted 2 weeks, but it wasn't exactly a blast. I only stayed for Jill's scenes and left when she finished so I didn't have to knock any teeth out. Mike replied. That's good. It could have gotten ugly, Nick commented. They shared a laugh. Meanwhile, across the pool, Dirk was chatting up a young woman who seemed to be smitten with him. This is one of the late extras who probably hasn't seen him before. Looks like he's making some progress, Mike remarked. I heard from a reliable source that he's quite the package, Annie added. Mike looked at her and she clarified. No, it's not Jill. Annie had a couple of other clients who might be romantically interested in Dirk. Nick asked, quite a package. What does that mean? Annie shrugged. I wasn't prying. Nick nodded. Fair enough. The evening went on with some people taking a dip in the pool, although not Mike. The highlight for Nick was when Samantha showed up in a bikini and started swimming, attracting the attention of almost all the male guests. As Sam jumped into the pool, Jill stood next to Nick and muttered something about bragging rights. Nick suggested that you take a dip too, but some of the guys might get too excited and I'll keep an eye out. Jill looked at Nick, then smiled and replied, I will if you will. Annie overheard and looked at Nick and said, Well, now it's time to speak up or stay quiet. Just keep it casual, no lingering touches. Nick and Jill went upstairs. Nick didn't have any bathing suits, but there were several sizes available for guests. Jill tossed him a black thong, but he opted for a classic pair of trunks. She handed him a blue one instead as a compromise. Jill changed into a bikini. As Nick watched with interest, she looked stunning and gestured to his trunks. She indicated that it was his turn. Nick undressed and struggled to get into his trunks, finding himself aroused as he watched Jill need help. She offered no. Nick declined. I've got enough problems as it is. He managed to squeeze into his trunks, losing his erection in the process. They went downstairs. Jill dived gracefully into the pool, while Nick admired her technique. There was a diving board and Nick knew how to use it. He executed a flawless somersault dive, earning applause as he surfaced. Annie was among the applauders, knowing that every woman there wanted him, including the movie stars in the pool, but for now, he was hers. As Annie watched Nick chatting with Sam and Jill by the pool, Vic approached her and remarked, You're just as gorgeous as those two. Annie glanced at him and replied, He's very handsome, tall and handsome, thank you. But your plan to win me over is not going to work, and in the end you won't like the outcome, she warned. Vic smiled charmingly, feigning disappointment. He was definitely an actor. Gil and Sam left the pool. Jill announced that there were bathing suits upstairs for anyone who wanted to swim, and there would be dancing to music with a DJ on the tennis court. Sam, Jill, and Nick approached Annie and Vince. Vince was openly looking at the women. To Annie's surprise, he started staring at Nick. Annie asked Sam, What does that mean? Sam laughed. He swings both ways. Very interesting. Sam explained. Maybe you should keep an eye on Nick. Annie chuckled. If Nick goes with him, I'll go to Mike's and maybe you'll both get wet. Jill and Sam moved closer to Annie, as if sharing a secret signal. They hugged her from both sides until she pulled away with a sigh. Just kidding, girls, kidding. Both women looked disappointed at first, but soon burst into laughter. Nick watched the whole thing and his swim trunks couldn't hide his reaction, which all the women noticed. Oh God, Nick, what's wrong? Jill exclaimed. "You know you saw it," Nick replied. "Sam cut in, but I didn't see it. Now it's my turn." She grabbed Nick's hand and led him inside and upstairs. Annie followed, still dressed but wet from the hug, feeling the need to shield Nick from the predatory Sam if possible. She realized that things were almost out of control and the danger was escalating. Yet she found herself less opposed to it. Following Annie, Jill was curious to see what would happen next. The four of them found themselves in the master bedroom, where Nick had undressed earlier. "We should get out of these wet clothes," Annie suggested, and Jill cheerfully let her top fall to the floor before removing her bottom. Sam was already naked. Annie took a little longer because of her dress and panties, but not much longer. Nick felt overwhelmed by the sexual tension in the room. He stood there, stunned by the way the women looked at each other, realizing that almost anything could happen, though he wasn't sure what he wanted. Well, that was actually a lie. He knew he wanted to be with all three of them, especially Sam, but that conflicted with his stance on sexual ethics in marriage. However, his views had already changed significantly. Despite the rules, Jill snuck up behind him, knelt down and pulled down his swim trunks, exposing his private part. She then reached out and touched it, while Sam moved closer to Annie, hugged her and shared a kiss, to which Annie responded. But then Jill came up behind Nick and declared, "No more fooling around. The play is still on, and I'm the hostess. I won't let you three have any fun without me." She tossed dresses to Sam and Annie for the short ones in the pool. "I put one on myself." Nick remained naked, and the women looked at him. Annie asked, "How are we going to dress him?" Jill replied, "Why bother dressing him?" Sam added, "Because we might want to dress him. If it comes to that, we have to fend off Vince and those young girls." Annie said, "I never agreed to any of this." She tossed Nick his usual swim trunks and a t-shirt. The others groaned. They all went down to the tennis court where the dancing was going on. Mike approached Nick and asked, "Have you slept with all three of them yet?" "No, although, gosh, we changed clothes right there in your bedroom." "Sorry, but nothing special happened." Jill stopped everything. "Mike, I couldn't resist. I guess I'm weak." Mike suggested that I'm up for a swap tonight. Nick looked at him. "No, that sounds interesting, but no, Jill is a real leader. I just can't do it." "Oh damn, my mother raised me wrong." Mike laughed and then said, "Well, at least I'll dance with her like I do with Sam." Mike led Annie to the dance floor to Jitterbug. Annie looked at Nick, who was waving at her. The crowd thinned out. Jill danced with Vic. Samantha approached Nick and led him to the dance floor. As the DJ switched to slow music, Nick pulled her close. Sam whispered in his ear, "I think it's time for us." Mike has Annie. He's going to hit on her, and Jill's going to hit on Vic. This was the ultimate test of his strength. His morals were also tested. He passed one test, but failed the other, and the whole party looked like a group of teenagers playing a risky game. When the slow music ended, Nick and Sam started dancing to the medium-fast beat. Sam danced exceptionally well. They moved together, and Nick began to feel excited again. Sam reciprocated. They lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, Mike was actually turning Annie on, as expected. At first, he hesitated, remembering the last party, but Annie got excited and Nick signaled for her to join Mike on the dance floor. Jill and Vic weren't as excited. Jill was more interested in the other couples. Vic was okay, but Jill was interested in Sam and Nick. It felt like a twisted morality game. Jill knew that if Nick went with Sam, Annie would probably go upstairs with Mike, but she didn't know what would happen next. She was unsure of her own actions if they split into couples. She thought she might go with Mike and Annie first. Then maybe Sam and Nick. Vic was left out. Then, as planned, DJ Mick took a break. It was inconvenient because he was fascinated by what was happening on the dance floor, but union rules and all that. "I'll be back in 10 minutes," he said quietly and went for a beer. Union rules. There were only 6 of them left, plus the staff. They were all gathered around the table between the pool and the dance floor. There were a few sidelong glances, but little conversation and a lot of tension. Jill spoke up. "I was wondering who I was going to join first." This statement hit the table like a bomb. Annie was holding Mike's hand. Nick and Sam were sitting on the love seat, her legs on his lap. Jill was sitting on Vic, but he felt more like furniture than a real participant. Annie looked at Nick and saw that Sam could take him if she wanted. At that moment, Annie decided that Nick was her only man, and she didn't want to share him. She rose, released Mike's hand, and swayed slowly toward Nick and leaned down to kiss him. Nick kissed her back. Sam, still on his lap, overheard. Annie whispered to Nick, "It's time to go home. My love, enough excitement to hold us over until the next time." Sam got up from Nick, who groaned. But Annie pulled him close and wrapped her arm around his waist. Looking around, she said, "I'm taking this man home where he belongs." Nick grabbed the keys in a trance-like state. Annie drove when they got home. She immediately took him to bed and undressed him. She wrapped her body around him and claimed they made love slowly and tenderly. Nick wasn't thinking about Sam. He was fully present with his wife. Everyone experiences vulnerability at times, relying on others to make sure everything is okay, and we're lucky to have someone who can do that.